And as a recap, the aim of API chats is a bit exploratory and may change, but for now it seems pretty interesting and fun to get a bunch of us together and talk about what's possible on the API, so we can have a bit of a sense of community in this space, and so people can learn and, most importantly, share ideas. The more people that are using the API and doing some cool stuff, then I think the better stuff that will come out of it in general. So fun to have a community around us to do this stuff. So little recap from last sessions. The first session was thinking about what people wanted to do with the API, and some ideas of what were possible. The last session, the second session, we were looking at how to do things from the developer tools in your browser. So nothing permanent, but just doing things like finding out what players are in your space, what objects are in your space, and a general understanding of what the API was and how it might work. And then a really short look at how to download a development environment, a coding environment. The one we were using was Visual Studio Code, so that we can make permanent changes. Hey Pedro, good to see you. So thinking about making these permanent changes, coding some like actual files that we can save on our computer and run from our computer, so that we can affect our spaces and save them in files. Great. All right. High five. I like that. So this session, well, I thought a useful next step was to talk about that development environment a little bit more. And if we're recording this session, which Evie stepped up to do, thank you, Evie, then we can hopefully have a recording that people can go back to and make sure that they can get their own setups all working, and then start doing some things with them. So let's do just that. Does anyone have any questions or ideas or thoughts before we jump into that?
No, I just got here, so nice to see you guys.
It's good to see you, Pedro. Thanks for being here.
Hola.
All right. All right. So last time we downloaded we had downloaded Visual Studio Code, which is a development environment that is free. It's a pretty powerful program that I don't understand all of the features involved, but enough for them to start coding an API, coding some Gather API extensions, I should say. So once we downloaded that, then we used set up an environment that was built by Bill from Uncork, who's on the Gather Discord, and is this great resource where with one line we can install a bunch of files and a bunch of environment stuff. That means that we can pretty quickly get up and running with coding our own API stuff. So I'll show you where we got to last time as a little reminder, and then I wanted to show you some examples. So as by way of a little tour around our on our Gather GT-Helper files that Bill set up. And let's try this. So I'm going to screen share. This one. All right. Okay, so hopefully you guys see this. So this is my screen and how it would look after I've installed my GT-Helper. So last time we created a folder, API chat 1. That's just a folder on my system. And we opened that folder in Visual Studio Code. And there wasn't much to see when we first opened it. There was nothing here. It was an empty folder. And then we did, in our terminal, we did this command, which was all set up by Bill, which is in my history. If you press up, you get all your history of what you've done before. And it's this. It's npx space gt/helper space init. I don't want to do it again because I've already done it, but what happened was once it did this, it installed a bunch of these files down the left-hand side. And these are all files that we'll need if we want to make stuff in Gather, make a Gather API extension. So let's do a really quick tour. If anyone's got any questions or thoughts as we go through, please just jump in. This is totally an open session. And there's loads to know about this, and I don't know it all by any means, but here's a little introduction. So Bill's put in this readme.txt, and there's a couple of interesting things in here that will help you out when you first start. First off, were requirements. These are things we haven't talked about yet, but you do need to download Node.js and TSC. And TSC, I don't know what it stands for, but it's the TypeScript that we need. Isn't that right, Pedro? Do you know what TSC stands for?
Not this acronym, but
Okay.
it does stand for TypeScript somehow.
Awesome. And by way of a little introduction, and again, not an expert, but a lot of coding online is done in JavaScript, but APIs often use TypeScript because it's a more heavily typed version. That just means that you're very explicitly telling it what type of thing you're talking about, whether it's a number, a string of characters, or an object, or any particular thing, because you're doing a lot of communication between your code and another system. Making sure that everybody is talking the same language is really important. So that's why TypeScript is very good for APIs. Okay, so if anybody's struggling to download those and install those, we can talk about that later, but you do need both those things for this to work. And then you can do these in the same place that you did npx GT-Helper init. You can do an install, do a watch, so that you're compiling your code that you've written, your really cool code, and then start launches it and makes it start working, and hopefully then you see something happen in your gather space. Okay, so there's a bit more information in there, and useful to have a little look at that, but that's a good README text put together by Bill. We've got a .env, and that stands for environment, and that's where you want to set up your API, what's the word I'm looking for?
API key, something like this.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, your key provided by Gather. And that's your own very specific code that you shouldn't give to someone else, which is why I'm not clicking on this, so you can't see it. And that is so that you can connect to your Gather space. And then the other important configuration stuff is the space that you want to connect to. So you put the URL for your space right in here. And so then what that means is once you've got that environment set up, once you've got your URL space in here, literally just like the address you would give somebody to come and meet you in your Gather space, once you've got your API key, and once you do your npm install, watch, and start, then you're connected, right? That's doing all the work for you to connect to your space. And any code that you put in here, in your Visual Studio Code, will then affect your Gather space. And if we do it right, then we can actually see things happening while this stuff is running on your computer. Eventually, you probably want to stop it running stuff on your computer if you've got like an up and running extension that people want to run all the time in your Gather space. And so you would take your code in Visual Studio Code and you would upload it to a server, something like Heroku is a popular one, and that runs that code all the time. But for now, if we're just learning, this is a really good space to test stuff out. We don't need to pay for a £7 a month server just now if we're just testing stuff out. Okay, so those are 3 important places to look first to get yourself up and running. And then the first place to notice, this is all like a big jigsaw. Like all of these files all work together, and you're never going to get the whole jigsaw in your head, maybe ever, but certainly not at the start. So don't worry if you feel like some knowledge is missing. You don't know where things are coming from. That's very normal, and you will slowly figure things out over time. But in general, the source, SRC, is where your code and lots of other bits of code are. And then once you do this watch command, or once you do a compile, which just means taking your code and compiling it ready to be run, then it goes into this dist folder, the distribution folder. And that is in JavaScript. So it's changing it from TypeScript into JavaScript in the dist folder. And the dist is the thing that runs, right? Then in between these two, usually, there's this node modules, and there's like a ton of stuff in here, all provided by Gather.town and other things, TypeScript and things. And you don't need to worry about this. I mean, it's interesting if you want to dive into this and figure out how things work. Like in this Gather game common, there's like a bunch of amazing stuff in here about how stuff works, and it gets very overwhelming at times. But if you want to have a little look around, you'll recognize things like your vehicle ID for your go-kart, your emoji status, and sort of starting to put these bits of the jigsaw together and help you understand how things work, how Gather does stuff, how it will like save your information about your map, save your information about players. I will update things in real time. So some really cool stuff in there if you want to get your head around it. But again, it gets pretty overwhelming pretty quickly. So you can jump in there if you want. So we've talked about environments. We've talked about some of the stuff that's provided for you. We've talked about what happens to your code once it gets compiled and then run. So where do you put your code? Where's the first place to look? So the first place I recommend looking is in this subscriptions, because this is the nuts and bolts of what we mostly want to do with our API. We want to do something when something happens, and that's usually an event, right? So these subscriptions are all listening, which is like quite a common way of talking about this, because it's a nice analogy. It's just waiting until something happens, then you can react to that. So this subscribe to events is a good clue. That name's a good clue to what's happening. So we're subscribing to this idea that something might happen. And then below that, there are things that might happen, right? Anything in green just means it's commented out, because we're not using it yet. But you can just remove these /stars and // and then put something in this event. So I've done that one already, or a player moves event. Okay. So this we talked about this last session. We did game.players in our console in our browser to see the players that were in our space. And you'll see this a lot in code. Game is like the top level, right? So game.subscribe to event is doing something. It's subscribing to the event player moves. All right. So when you first do this, if you've seen Bill's code and you've just installed it, you've just done this GT-Helper in it, then this will be commented out. So as a first exercise, if you want, what could be fun is to uncomment it until it looks like this. And then what I'm doing here is adding a console.log. And this is a very common way to debug. Console.log is a way to just say something. Right? And so as a very simple first step, this could be when any player moves, then it's going to say on your little console, this bit down here, saying something, right? So let's test that. If anyone's got any questions or any input so far, then jump in, but I think this might be a good little time to test what's going on here. So like before, yeah, go for it.
You're doing a good job of explaining this, like introducing it. So what's the next step towards running this code that you changed there?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So once you change something, then it makes sense you got to save it, right? That happens everywhere. So I'm just going to hit Control and S to save. And then this is in the SRC folder. So like I said before, we need to save it and then compile it to get it into the dist folder, to get it ready to go out into the wild, right? So preparing our pet code here. So to do that, there's a command that you can find in readme.txt, which is npm run watch. All right, and this is set up for you already, so you just got to do that to compile things. So once I'm in subscriptions, check I'm in the right folder. I can go npm run watch and hit enter. You might see something happen. You might see nothing happen. But it will tell you like that it's doing the compilation and it's found 0 errors. Great. Just as an example, I'm going to show you what happens if you do something wrong. Maybe I just hit some random letters by mistake and save that. So if you do npm run watch here, it'll tell you that something's wrong. And you can already tell it because it does this like common yellow red wiggly line underneath. Great. So it's got an error. Doesn't know what that is. Well, great. Well, let's get rid of the thing that's wrong. Save it again. It's back. Great. So this runs all the way in the background, and you can just leave that running while you do things, and it's constantly compiling. And once you've finished it and you think you're ready to go, then you can stop compiling and you can start running it. There are some faster ways to set up this environment that Pedro told me about, but we can come back to that just so you don't have to compile and then come out of that and start, but we can tackle that in a different session. So to come out of this, I do Control and C, and then hit the Y button, and then in our readme.txt, what was the next one? npm run start. Okay, so we've done the compile. Now we need to launch. Okay, so this is going to do a couple of things we've talked about already. It's going to take this code that we've written and compiled and run it, and like jigsaw it all together with our environment variable, the API key, with our config, the URL that we're connecting to. It's going to put all those things all together and connect to our space, and then keep that connection open. So let's see if it does that. So npm start and hit enter. Okay, so it's telling us that it's starting, that it's running this command. I was just a little shortcut for this command. It's running the app.js file. It's connecting to our space, which is great, the space that we're in right now, the core space. It might show us a few warnings, but that's fine. Oh, here we go. Right, so somebody's moving, and every time somebody moves, it's triggering us the console.log.
I think that's the bot in the space.
I think you're right.
Moving,
Yeah, the bot just constantly moves.
Every second or something, or every 500 milliseconds.
Right. So this gets pretty boring pretty quickly. All right. So we can stop it running by, again, pressing Control and C, and then hitting Y. And that's probably enough of just saying something boring. So let's try and be a bit more interesting in here, because we don't just have to say things that don't have any effect. I wrote this a little bit earlier. I'm just going to paste it back in here. To make sense of this, I'm going to describe these three different things that we've got here that are in blue. So everything in orange, which we've already seen, that was the saying something gets put inside these inverted commas. And that's just a string of characters. So it doesn't matter what you put in there. You can say whatever you want, and it'll come up on our little terminal below. But the things in blue do matter. We need to get these right in order for it to work. So every event will have two things that get plugged into it, these parts of the jigsaw. A player something, or like some variable here that relates to the event that we're talking about. So player moves, in this case, and context. And both of these are contain loads of information that are useful to us to understand who moved, where they moved to, and what map they moved in, and lots of other things that are really useful to us. So if you see down below, then hopefully it makes sense that when we've got the context, when we put a dot after it, then that's showing us that we're sort of drilling down into the next layer of things that are available underneath context. So context has a player available under it, and player has a name available under it. So this is how we get the player's name. So this will tell us that player, and then it'll show their name right after it. And if you're in this environment, if you've got it all set up for yourself, you can sort of see this. I'm just going to start typing context. And Visual Studio Code has this feature that it shows you a bunch of things that are available for these objects that we're working with. So if you put a dot, then it shows you in this little drop down all the things that are available underneath context. It's got the map we're talking about, the player's ID, the space ID, and target IDs. So we're not super concerned with all of these because it gets complicated quite quickly. But under the player, so if we just click on player, then we've selected whatever player has triggered this event. If we do another dot, it'll show us all the things that we can show about that player or use about that player. You can see if they're in conversation. You can see what their name is, and what their outfit is, if they're on Spotlight, what their text status is, their position X and Y, a bunch of stuff. Right, so you can, I hopefully start to see really quickly that there's loads you can do with just the information that Gather is giving you when this event happens. So I've already done this, so I don't need to write it again. But you'll see there that I've got their name, so that when this event happens, it's going to tell me the player, this name. Then I want to know where they've moved to. So it's moved to X and Y. So you'll see in this case, it's not the context I'm using, because that doesn't contain the information I need. If I want to know where this player is, then the player location information is under player moves. All right. So again, I'll just write it here so you can see what happens if I start to write this. Player moves comes up, and if I hit a dot, then it shows me that I can get just 6 different things about that player moves. The direction that player is facing, up, down, left, right, or dancing as direction as well. The map ID and X and Y. So you can tell what map it's in, what room in your gather space, and its location, X and Y. So it's as simple as that, right? Gather's doing a lot of this work for us. We're just putting it together in the right way. So if this is going to say the player's name has moved to this X and this Y. I could put in fact, let's do it right now. Put in another string in map. Then I want whatever map that player is in, just so I know that's not in like one room that I'm not in, or I can tell which room they're in. And so player moves dot map ID. That might not be quite enough because we need to know the actual map ID. Like we'll need to know off the top of our head what map IDs we need. Oh, sorry, and I should say after the string and before the string we need a plus because we're stringing these together. There's another more elegant way to do this, but I thought this would be a bit simpler just to show you right at the start. So once we're doing like a thing, we need to put a plus for the string bit and then another plus after it, right? So everything's joined together with pluses. So we're just doing like a big long plus. Okay, so let's save that. Let's compile again. Again, if you press up in your terminal, it shows you all the things you've done before. So you can just go up to run watch. I'm going to compile this.
I have an idea as well of something we could add to this compilation.
Awesome.
Like we are calling npm run start after compiling the code, right?
Yep.
There is a simple way of stringing together those two commands.
Oh, nice.
But yeah, so that's maybe let's talk about that later. But yeah, so now we see the log, right?
Nice. Yeah, and actually my map thing that I just added isn't working. I'm going to have to find another way to do that. But if you guys move around a little bit, you'll see we'll see it pop up here as well. So it's doing like a very simple thing. It's just taking the player's name, their X, and their Y, and showing me on here what's going on. So I'm going to switch to co-work and do a little move around.
I was trying to move as well.
Yeah, awesome.
All right.
There we go, great. So a bunch of people are moving, and it's telling us exactly where they're moving to, their X location and their Y location. Great. All right, so we've just written something. We've just written a gather extension that shows us where people are moving to. So that's great. So if you're like following along with the video, or if anybody happens to be following along right now, that's great. Then like congratulations, you did something. That's awesome.
Did something with the Gather API, right? Like this is really in depth actually. Like to just get to this stage, there are so many steps, right?
Right, it's a pretty big win. Yeah, I think you should be patting yourself on the back right now if you're doing this along. Great. So I'm going to stop this running because we don't need to be monitoring this the whole time, and just take a moment to do a little recap. But in general, people here, Gabriel, Pedro, and Evie, any questions that you have on this? Anything you want to clarify? Are we doing pretty well so far? Awesome. Cool.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Excellent. All right. So we're winning. I think like we're doing things. We're affecting the space. We're starting to understand the like very complex jigsaw that's going on in terms of all the stuff we've got in our setup, our Visual Studio Code setup. We are starting to understand that there are events happening. Whenever an event happens, then we can respond to it. So maybe we should jump into something a little bit more complex and see if we can do something with that.
All right.
All right.
Just wondering, like about the map ID.
Oh yes.
Like this is turning out undefined. I'm not sure. Like I'm trying to think like why this could be. Like could it be that actually player moves does not carry this information? We were expecting it to, but it doesn't. But there's map also right in there.
Yeah, I think you might be right. I think player moves maybe doesn't carry that information, and maybe it's map in context is a better way to do that.
Another way would be context.player.map maybe, but that's I think maybe it's worth trying out both ways. to see which one is, if they're both the
Really good idea.
same, if they're different.
Yeah, that's a
You
really good
know.
idea. And this, by the way, is a really good way to error check, right? So if you're doing something more complex and you're trying to save something, then you can write a console log and put a bunch of information in it so that you can tell what's going on if something's not working. So that's basically what we're doing right now in map. So let me say this one is map player on map and map. What was this one going to be, did we say?
Context.map.
Context on map. And the secret is how to remember this, or how to put the information somewhere that you'll remember. Context. Following along, hopefully you're seeing what I'm doing here. I'm just adding those two different variables into this so we can figure out which one's the right one to use. And Pedro, is now a good time to talk about your stringing together the watch and start commands?
Oh, maybe, yeah. So the help file, the README that you were mentioning,
Mm-hmm.
he's pointing to the npm run start command,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and this is a command that is originally declared in the package.json, right? That you also have open there.
Yeah.
So, like in this file, you have the scripts like key, the property,
Mm-hmm.
and inside of it you have both those commands, right? Watch and start. And
Mm-hmm.
then what I was thinking is maybe you could actually do both things in one command. So whenever you called start,
Mm-hmm.
you would call first TSC, just the basic TSC,
Here?
and then with double E, I think. Double, not E. There's I think it's a ampersand. I don't know how you say that. Uh,
Ampersand?
yeah, that one. How do you call that? I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
you're quite right. Ampersand, yeah.
Okay, so I think it's like if you use maybe double that
Right.
character, it's gonna run one command and then the other.
Nice.
Maybe I mean, let's try that. If it
Let's try it.
works, it would be nice because you can just use npm run start and then it's gonna compile the code, and then only after it finishes, it's gonna run the compiled code, right? So you have both things happening in one command if it works.
Okay, let's try. This is another way, like part of the jigsaw, right? This JSON file, because it's got a ton of stuff in it that sort of tells Gather what to do when we do this. So let's try it. It's a good learning point. Okay, so yeah, it's calling that command tsc and
I'm not sure if that actually happened as expected because, I mean, wasn't that supposed to log
oh no,
anything like TSC?
no, it is working because it's done.
Yeah, it
It's
did
outputting.
add the new console.log, right?
Yeah,
Maybe it did work.
so that did work.
It's just that TSC was very silent. It didn't say
Yeah,
anything. It just compiled
yeah,
the code.
it just compiled. Yeah, we had no
Yeah.
errors. Okay, great. All right, well that worked for us. Lovely. Um, Feel free to do that at home, but also if you don't want to do that, then the old way of just doing the watch and then the start after is totally fine. Okay, so I think this is working for us. I'm going to move around a little bit, so we've got somebody moving that isn't just the bot.
Oh, I noticed one of the events had the context.map defined. Like just one of them. I don't know which one. If you scroll up, you might see it.
All right, okay. It's tricky to see because the bot
Keeps moving. Yeah.
keeps moving. Yeah. Uh,
There are yeah, we couldn't find it. But in one of them it just shows like object for that like context map.
oh
So it
yeah, you're right.
means, yeah,
Yeah.
some like in some specific event this was actually present, this variable.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe even the original one, player moves.mapid, might have worked in this scenario,
Mm-hmm.
but it wouldn't in most cases. So I guess this tells of sometimes where events can have different, like they can behave differently with different information that they might carry, depending on what the event actually was. Because a player moving can happen when you press the key, like, or when you send a teleport command, or when you enter a portal, and
Sure.
maybe those trigger different information
Hmm.
in the event that you're subscribing to.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, so not all events come through exactly the same way, even if it's the same event. Yeah, absolutely. And if we're writing code to deal with certain events, we need to be like aware of, well, probably as it happens for me, if it's something isn't working, we don't need to be aware of everything because that's sort of impossible. But if something isn't working, that might be why there's
Yeah.
there's the event is happening a slightly different way. All right, so just to finish off with this moves event, we can see that it's doing what we asked it to do. It's saying it's taking the player. So when I moved, it's saying the player's name is Terence, which it is, and I moved to 8653, which doesn't mean much to me, but I guess that's fine. Like if we wanted to use that in our code later, we could. And it showed me that I'm in this map ID, which also isn't super useful, but if we needed to use that again, then that's a useful thing to have. But I don't recognize what that is. I would have to like convert that into like the actual name of it. So rather than getting the ID, I would want the name of the map probably if I was reading this. But it didn't. This one didn't work. All right. So this tells us that it's this first one, context.player.map, that we want to use, so that we can, as the better way, or the only way maybe, to get the map ID for whatever player is moving. And you'll see that this same code runs for different players. So when it ran for the management bot's in a different map, right? You'll see that this is a different map to the one I'm in, and a different room. So it will just run for anybody that moves. And you can imagine if you've got a big space with hundreds of people in it, this would be like a crazy amount of output, and you probably couldn't keep track of it. Great. Okay, good. I think that sort of like is a nice way to round out our player moves event. I think let's move on to something a little bit more complicated. Not much, hopefully, but a little bit. Now that we're all experts on player moves, let's go on to player interacts. And I've got some code in here already that I was testing out before. And hopefully it's a bit simple. You'll probably be able to start, like, depending on how much coding you've done before, you'll probably be able to understand the guts of what's going on here. But what I'm trying to do is react to when somebody presses X. So when there's an object in the space that you press X on, whether it be what do you call it, a node object or an embedded object or whatever, then anytime that happens in a space, then this event will trigger, right? And we're able to pick up any of those events. Anytime anyone presses X, we'll know about it. And one of the most useful things I've used in this context is using a particular object that I've put in the space, because you can find out what the ID of the object is. And you might remember from our little chat last time, every object has to have an ID, right? That's how Gather works, so that it can know which object is which. And so whenever player interacts happens, anytime anyone presses X next to an object that is interactable, then this will send you the ID. And so you can find out if I know there's an object in the space with this ID, I've just called it moving, then do something. So that's what I've just written a little bit of code to say. If the person pressing X is pressing X to the object that I've put in called moving, then I want to do a particular thing, right? And this is really useful because this allows you to make an interactive object, and you get to decide what that interaction is. So rather than having to rely on Gather's interaction to press X and open a node object, press X and open a website, press X and open a video, you can say, well, I want to press X and do something. I want to press X and then send someone a message saying hi, or I want to press X and give someone a picture of a cat. And it can really be like many things, and you can decide what that thing is for you. So what I thought might be fun is pressing X and making that object move away. So putting something like tantalizing, like I've got a piece of gingerbread, and we're going to, if once the person wants to eat the gingerbread, they come up, they press X, but the gingerbread just moves further away from them. Right? Just as a little example, why not? Let's try and make this fun. So I'm going to just stop sharing so I can show you how I'm going to put the object in, and then how to make the object interactable. So let's stop real quick. Putting objects in spaces is like a little tedious, because I do it all from the console, like we were talking about last week. But it's not too bad. So let me just share what I need to share here so that you can see what I'm talking about. I'll just do the whole screen, and then I'll show you this. So just in my spreadsheet, just where I've stored this, I've got this piece of text. And this is what I'm going to put into my console so that I can add an object into my space. And it's this game.setObject. So setObject will add an object into your space. And it's pretty much what Gather is doing when you use the map maker or the build to set an object. The set object needs, it opens these parameters here and closes them at the bottom. And so inside it needs a bunch of things, so it knows exactly where and how to set the object. It needs to know what map it's putting it in. Yeah, so the map ID. But from last week, we know that we don't need to know it off by heart. We just need to ask Gather about the map ID that we're standing in right now. So there we go. That's easy. It needs an ID. I'm going to call this moving. You could call it whatever you want. Or you could set up like some clever way to make a random variable there. And then it takes a bunch of information about the thing that you're setting that I've just highlighted. And inside curly brackets, you've got a name, an offset, and normal, which is the URL to the image, the type, width, height, preview message, the distance away that it triggers, and the ID again. Okay, so we're going to go through these so you can understand what I'm talking about. But first thing important to note is there's two places you need to put the ID. The second argument here, and also inside the object here. Okay. Distance threshold is pretty obvious. If you're one tile away, this also, if you do this in map makers, right? So if you're one tile away, it'll turn yellow and be interactable, or 5 or 4. So that's just a number you can put in there. The preview message is what comes up when you walk towards it. The height is the number of tiles high, and width, number of tiles wide it is. The X is where it is, where you're going to put it on the map. And an easy way for me to do that, if I'm doing it in the console, is just where I'm standing, right? So I want this to go where I'm standing. So game.getMyPlayer.x is the X, and then the Y of where I'm standing. And then these two I'm going to talk about in a bit more detail. So normal is where the image is stored. And so I can show you whenever I want to get an image that's already stored on Gather, then I can get it quite easily from either map making build menu. So just before, I did this before we started. I wanted to put a gingerbread object in the space. So if I go to this gingerbread object, I don't even need to put it in the space. I just need to get where it's stored. So if I go here and press the right mouse button and click copy image address, and then I'll just put it here so you can see, this is the URL of where that image is. So that's what I need to use in my normal right here. Right? So that's that.
That's a great way of getting those images.
Right. Yeah, really useful, isn't it? Yeah. And then the Gather's doing that work for you. Gather's storing that image. You can also do the same with an uploaded image. So you can upload your own image and then do exactly the same thing. Gather takes your uploaded image and puts it on their server somewhere, and you can do exactly the same thing. So you can actually put your own images up here as well, which is really handy. Okay, so now that we know how to put images in, that's great. And then the other thing I was going to talk about is the type. So there are a couple of different types of objects, video, note objects, other things like that. And a type 5 is one that I use all the time, that we often use because it's an interactable object, but it doesn't necessarily have any specific interaction. You can decide what that interaction is. So if you're making your own interactable object, then that's a type 5 object. I can't off the top of my head remember other numbers for what things are, but there are, I think, up to 7 different types of object, Pedro. Would that be right?
Sorry, I was looking it up as you were talking.
Great,
I
thank
think
you. Yeah.
there's like 10 or something, but
Oh, wow.
yeah, for the most part, only a few are normally used, right? You don't need to know every single object type.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
I did send it to you though, so maybe you can share it later.
Oh, great. Thank you. Excellent. I will do that. Fantastic. Okay, so I think that hopefully makes sense. This is what you need to set an object. So I'm just going to do this. I'm just going to put this object in our space and then work on that from there. So I'm going to go to the space and press F12, our dev tools, paste it in here, and then press return. Hopefully that's worked. Great. Yeah, right where I'm standing is a gingerbread man. And if I go close to it, then that preview message comes up. Press X for gingerbread. If I press X, well, nothing happens because I haven't written the code for it yet, or not. Even if I have, I'm not running the code for it yet. So that gingerbread is going to sit there until I'm ready to do something with it. So if we go back to our subscriptions file, this isn't running yet, so it's not working. But what I'm saying here is, if the ID of the object that somebody has pressed X on is moving, which this is, because I've just put the ID in here as moving. Yeah. So if it's moving, then save a couple of things so we can use them later. Save the map that we're in, save the ID of the object that we're in, save the location of the player that's just clicked on it, and then we'll use it later. And then I've called this new function, which we haven't used before. Only new because I haven't used it before, but it's been around for a while. And this is move map object. And that should be pretty obvious what this is doing. So game.moveMap object takes a bunch of things to make it work. It takes the map that you want the object to move in, that the object is in. And so we've already saved that up here. So that's great. We've got that already. It takes the object ID, which will be moving in this case, but we've already saved the object ID. So we can just use that thing we've saved right there. Great. Then it takes an X and a Y, and that's the location you want to move the object to. And just as a very first run at this, I'm just going to add 2 to the X and add 2 to the Y. So I'm taking the location of the person and adding 2 to it, taking the location of the Y location of the person and adding 2 to it. So this is just going to move the gingerbread person far away. It's kind of an annoying thing to do, but this is just an experiment for us. So the map, the object ID, the X and Y location in curly brackets, and then the amount of time you want it to take to move there. So 300 milliseconds, it's 0.3 of a second. And then it takes a couple of options for the type of movement. This is linear, which means it's just going to go at the same rate and stop. But there are things like back, which I think will go and sort of bounce a little bit. Well, there is a back and a bounce, and a couple of other ones. And I'll show you where to find those in a minute. But if this works, then whenever the person walks up to the gingerbread, presses X, then the gingerbread's going to move away from them in 0.3 seconds in a linear way. So let's try this. We've saved it. Compile it.
I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah.
And it also gives some ideas of like, this could also be moving in a specific direction in relation to the player, where the player is facing as well, like as a more complicated logic,
Right.
but it would be
Absolutely.
interesting.
Because we know that we can get information about which way the player is facing, who the player is, all sorts of things. We can make this really interactive in terms of who's doing it or where they are, what they're doing. So yeah, absolutely. It's pretty simple, but we can quite quickly get more complicated. Oh, we've still got the player moves happening. That's okay. We'll just ignore that for now and go to our space and see if this works. Okay, so I'm going to walk out to my gingerbread, press X for gingerbread, and it's moved. Great, it worked. Let's see if it works for Pedro. It does. Great. So no matter what we do with the gingerbread, it's just going to keep moving.
Yeah, you moved away from the meeting area.
Apologies.
Awesome.
So the gingerbread just moves away, right? Super simple, kind of annoying, but it does it, right? Like we've made that work. We've just made an API. I'm going to stop this. An API extension that moves an object around. Just like Pedro said, we can do way more interesting things with this. We could randomize it a little bit, right? So instead of always moving to the right plus 2 and move down because plus 2, we could generate a number that between like -2 and +2. So it could move up, down, left, or right depending on something random. Yeah, because you can create random numbers in code. We could, just like you said, Pedro, if somebody is facing up when they click X, then it could move up or move back behind the person, right? So you could figure out a way to always move behind the person just to be annoying. So
It's
right,
awesome. It's awesome. A great feature. I really like it.
yeah, let's put gingerbread in all our spaces and have it so nobody can ever get a gingerbread.
It's
Great.
great.
Awesome. Okay, I think that's probably about enough coding for this session. We'll do a little bit of a recap. I want to show you some of these, like where to find these features about types of objects, and what things you can put in this linear bit. But any questions from you guys right now?
Mm.
Everybody's happy.
Is there a simple way of knowing which events are available, and I don't know, maybe what data is associated to each event?
That's a really good question. Do you know the answer to that, Pedro?
Um, no, I
So
mean, I
let's
know
talk
a
about it.
few ways, but I'm just
Yeah,
wondering, like, how you feel about this issue in particular, because
yeah,
there's so much in Gather.town, right? How do
yeah,
we know what to do?
yeah. You're absolutely right. Um, I mean, and then this is part of the struggle sometimes with Gather because there's not loads of documentation about this, and a lot of it's in people's heads, and we sort of work on this. And I know you've done a ton of work on this, Pedro, working out where to find this information and how to catalog it a little bit. But there's tons of subscriptions that you can subscribe to. And I found recently, maybe you can help me with this, Pedro. I found where to find those events in my coding setup, right, in my Visual Studio Code, and some of the stuff that's set up already. Do you
Yeah,
remember where that is?
I don't like off the top of my head. I don't know where all the possible subscriptions are stored, but I guess there's a file called. Well, I'm just looking at it right now. I think there's a file in this environment that you set up
Mm-hmm.
called event.d.ts, and that's in Gather Town, the node modules, Gather Town.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we can go there to showcase it. But
Oh yeah,
right now, uh, you're not sharing the screen, so I don't know.
cool. Yeah, I will do that just now.
Yeah, I,
Um,
We'll also post something here.
oh, sorry. I should have sent it directly to the link, but in source of the Gather.town, there's events.proto, and that has all of the events that are accessible.
awesome. Oh, there we
Yeah.
go. Yeah, I've just seen that.
Um, where are the event? Oh yeah, server client event. There's
Have it happy now.
something in that file around line 615, I guess. Like there's a list starting
Mm-hmm.
there, and you can also find it in events. If I think it's like there's one file where you actually have syntax highlighting, etc. Because, but it's a little more complex. But it's just uh,
Mm-hmm.
dist gather town gather game common
Mm-hmm.
dist src generated do not touch. Well, that's where I saw it, but there's probably in other places as well. Events dot d dot ts, because that's with typed the actual type definitions. But somewhere around that file, on line 489, you have that list of events as well, similarly to the events.proto, but just I think this is the actual event variables, like the data variables, the definitions for those. After you subscribe to the event, there's the first variable with the event name,
Mm-hmm.
just before the context. I think that those are those variables.
Gotcha.
Like,
Awesome. Okay, yeah, thanks for this, Will and Pedro. This is awesome.
But
Um,
it's like the problem is this is just a list of events, right? We
right.
don't
Yeah.
know when those events happen or what exactly is in them. Although if you follow the path to each of those, like like for instance, player enters portal. If you control command click that, you would also go like into a definition of that. I think in the green one, like
Oh yeah.
on the next line, if you command click that interface, you might find the definition of it.
Go to definition.
Yeah, maybe. So I think it's, yeah. So there you have it. It's like target URL and bypass prompt. So that's what's inside of
Hmm.
this, probably, right? What could be inside of this
Yeah.
specific event.
So it does become a bit of a detective game to try and
Yeah,
figure out what all this does. Particularly if you're trying to do something a little bit different, a bit that like something that people haven't done before. I mean, you can tell a lot by the names, right? So like it does sort of make sense that if somebody what player joins, yeah, so if a player
yeah,
joins the space, um, if there's a sound played, if something sets the desk, right? So that, but you can see and probably appreciate this. There's so much going on in gather spaces all the time. And you can imagine, you know, if there's lots of people in your space, then some people will be pressing X, some people will be updating their focus mode status. Some people will be there might be some moving things happening. So all of these things happening all at the same time, it gets, you know, it's kind of mind-boggling that all this is controllable by you, and you can react to some of this stuff. And you can imagine a very complex Gather API extension that does like loads of things all at once. But it's possible, right? It's possible to set this up. You have to be a little bit wary of doing, I guess, too many things at once that might get a little bit too complex, or not complex, but just too much at once. Like setting objects, there's a bit of a limit on how many objects you can set per second, so that you're not slowing down the space too much, and that's set by Gather. But it is kind of amazing, right? That there's all these things that we can do, and because we are like putting our lives online and like being an avatar in Gather, it's kind of feels a bit amazing to be able to control this, because it feels like being able to control like a kind of like magic. You know, like the alternative, or the context of it being in a real person setting. Like, can you imagine being able to do something like immediately when somebody walks into a room? I mean, that's pretty awesome, right? Or immediately when somebody says something in players chat, you can react to that. So you get a lot of control over this, and really the sky's the limit, like what you want to do in these spaces when these things happen. So it's really quite exciting. I get excited thinking about this stuff, which is awesome. Okay, Pedro, you gave me this just then out, so I thought I'd showcase this as well. This is the object types, so thanks for this, much appreciated. So 9 different types of objects that can exist in Gather spaces. There's none is just an object just for decoration that doesn't have any interaction associated with it, and you can probably see, or just from the names, like what these other ones are, right? Websites, posters, and these are probably familiar from the map maker as well. So this type 5 is really useful if you want to make your own interactive object. Then that's an extension object, so I would recommend that one. And a modal extension is like a password door, something that pops up that you can click buttons on and click submit. I don't know anything about side panel triggers, and I don't think
me
anyone.
neither.
Yeah, good. I don't think I know anything about component modals either. Do you, Pedro?
No, I mean I know about the number 7 there. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
think
It's the extension.
that's
Yeah.
used for a lot of things. But I even like wonder if every one of those is actually used. Well, I mean, some might be actually remnants of a previous version where they didn't remove the code, but maybe they don't have support for the, I mean,
Sure.
type, or it doesn't do anything, or
Yeah.
something like this.
Yeah. Awesome.
It's worth like investigating. I think that's yet another thing where with some detective work, like by creating those objects with those types, you might be able to get some insight into what they are actually doing, even though you already have access to the definition. It's one thing to say an object is a modal whatever object, but it's another to actually know what that means, right? In the context of the game or of the client here.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Cool. All right. So then, last thing that I wanted to do before we finish up was to look at that move map object and understand what's possible. So one way to do it is this sort of outdated list, but it's still useful, of sort of some docs on like hosted by Gather. And if you look at this, like this is the sort of way that things are described, which you'll see either through that way we were doing in Visual Studio Code or on this site. But this function takes a bunch of things separated by commas. So this map ID, which is we sort of already know about, on the object ID, and then it takes the X and Y of where you want the object to go. And you can also add an offset, an X and an X offset. So you don't just have to go to a per tile. You can go like to like tile 86 and then push it a little bit further to like 86 point something, you know, and there are 32 pixels in per tile. So you can do an offset if you want that duration in milliseconds. And then this easing value that we talked before, I was using linear. But if you're doing this, it's kind of fun to play around with these. So cubic, elastic, bounce, and back are your other options. And bounce does this kind of funny bounce when it gets to its destination. Back, I think, goes a little bit too far and then comes back. Elastic, I can't totally remember what it does, or cubic, I'm not sure. So if you do this, let us know what those do, because it'd be kind of fun to know. Great. Okay. I think that's enough of talking from me. Hopefully that's been really informative for everybody else. If anybody has any questions, please do shout. But otherwise, let's save this recording, and like hopefully this works out. We can put a recording out there, and people can watch back and see it later.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. This was really great. Thank you so much for running it.
Yeah.
I can send a link to that docs. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Evie, for being here. Yeah, great to have you.
Yeah, great to be here. All right, gonna go ahead and stop the stream. Thank you so much.
Cool.